Geopolitically, this has been an incredible week. There's so many talking points, so many angles to look at, but there's absolutely no escaping the fact, with the greatest of diplomatic facade, I think there's no escaping the fact that there's a clear split between the United States and Europe. Europe with some other partners such as Canada. Um, it's palpable. It's absolutely palpable. Now, apologies, I may repeat some of the things I've said in the previous video, but I think it's so significant, it's worth repeating. This is yesterday's Times, and it's sort of told through four photographs. Meltdown in the Oval Office. Um, I want to address a few things. Firstly, well, I'll use this anecdote. In 1940, there was a publication called Guilty Men, and it was pseudonym was Cato. It was three authors, later revealed to be Michael Foot, Peter Hard, and Frank Owen. And they were a cross-party group who basically named 15 prominent politicians that they accused of appeasing the Third Reich. Among them were former Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, Neville Chamberlain, of course, and Ramsay MacDonald, Sir Simon, uh, Sir John Simon, Sir Samuel Hoare. There were other prominent politicians. If there was an equivalent publication today, The Guilty Men, that is, prominent figures who are appeasing a tyrant, it would have to be Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, and there'll be some others, but certainly those three come to mind. I really, really think that the United States can no longer claim to be the leader of the free world. It just can't. The United States is the most powerful country in the world by virtue of its enormous economy, its huge military. It is the most powerful country in the world, but I just don't think America has any moral leadership anymore, at least not from this White House. Now, before I continue, I want to be very clear on something. I'm not anti-American, and I understand the fact that there are millions of Americans who are deeply embarrassed by Trump, disgusted even. Among the numerous acts of solidarity with both Zelensky and the Ukrainian people was a large Ukrainian flag unveiled in Times Square in New York City. Um, and many Americans have been posting messages of solidarity and expressing their embarrassment with their president. Um, and indeed, there have been Americans who've even laid down their lives. Yesterday in Kyiv, or a few days ago in Kyiv, a guy by the name of Ethan Hartwick, who's with the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, laid to rest in Kyiv. He's one of numerous foreign volunteers. We've had British fighters as well who've died out there. So it's important to not judge all Americans by what Trump and Vance come out with. Nevertheless, there's no getting around the fact that a majority of Americans put these people into power. Um, I want to address the gaslighting of President Zelensky because the things they were coming out was it's just so false, and I will be repeating myself from the previous video, but it's important. This idea that Zelensky's not thankful. He's repeatedly said thanks. He's repeatedly shown his gratitude. But I don't know what they expect. Do they expect him to get down on his knees and kiss their feet? I mean, he has repeatedly expressed his gratitude. So have Ukrainians, um, for the support that Europe and the United States has provided. Um, that's one point. Secondly, the idea America doesn't owe Ukraine anything, that isn't true. Bill Clinton acknowledged that he actually took some responsibility for saying that in the 90s, when Ukraine gave up its nuclear capabilities, because it was the remnants of the former Soviet Union, the return was solidarity, security for Ukraine. So they've had that thrown back in their face. So yes, actually, the United States does owe Ukraine in that sense. The fact that they sacrificed their nuclear program, that's important. But for Donald Trump last week to accuse Ukraine of starting the war, you know what? Zelensky didn't even bring that up. He would have been within his rights to. He would have said, Mr. President, you falsely accused my country of starting the war. He didn't even bring that up. I'm so, so disgusted. I mean, To be honest, I'm almost more angry with Vance than I am with Trump. Trump is what he is. I think it's no secret at this point. But JD Vance is someone who's looking at the White House. He's the vice president. If something happens to Trump, he's incapacitated by a stroke or something. I'm not convinced his health is as great as he claims. He's a 78-year-old man. If something happened to Trump, JD Vance is the American president. Um, he was the one that initiated this avalanche of insults at President Zelensky. And remember, English isn't Zelensky's first language. So not only is he there having to defend himself from these smears and this onslaught, abusive behaviour to a guest that they invited there. I mean, what does that say about Trump and Vance that this is how they treat a guest? Why invite Zelensky there only to publicly try and humiliate him and gaslight him? It really is disgusting. Um, and this pathetic. I'm not even going to give him the the honor of naming him the journalist who questions Zelensky on why he doesn't wear a suit. This is so shallow and so pedantic. Well, firstly, Winston Churchill didn't wear a suit in many of his visits during the war years. Um, Zelensky has given a very clear reason for this. It's to show solidarity with Ukrainian troops on the front line. I mean, I really have no problem with it. And if you look at what's happened in London in the last couple of days, absolutely no European leader has an issue with this. An actual king, King Charles III, welcomes Zelensky with open arms. He has no problem with it. Frankly, it says that European leaders have more maturity than the current American leadership, so-called leadership. I mean, it's for that journalist to have a go at Zelensky. Zelensky gave a very good answer. Look, I'm not here to wear a costume. I'll wear a costume after the war. Maybe I'll wear yours. It's such a petty and pathetic. And then that joke of a congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is I'm so proud of this. I forget this guy's name, Brian something. A disgraceful journalist. I'm sure there'll be many American news people who will press the Trump administration on the way they've treated Zelensky. Rubio was on CNN, I believe it was CNN. I I I expect Trump to be what he is. Vance, I have no respect for. Rubio, I used to respect. I used to think he was a half decent Republican. I thought he would be the one chance at possibly a reasonable. Yeah, that's just gone. Forget it. Rubio's a sellout. This is a man who once spoke out against the Castro regime in Cuba. He's now, bootlicking Trump, and it's disgusting. I have to say though, Rubio looked uncomfortable. Vance looked smug, when the journalist. So I'm not going to even call him a journalist. When the shock jock asked Zelensky that question, Vance had this ridiculous grin on his face, and Rubio looked uncomfortable. I think Marco Rubio is a man who sold his soul for ambition, or for what reason, I don't know. But he seems to, like a lot of Republicans, there's Republicans who've previously expressed support for Ukraine. They've previously, even worn Ukrainian colours and so on, and now they've jumped over themselves to defend Trump. There's a few that still have integrity, like Lynn Cheney, but it is a minority. The Democrats are united on this. That's no surprise. Um, Credit to them, but unfortunately, they're not running the United States at the moment. I just anyway, moving away from the United States, what we've seen in Europe, I have to say, I think Starmer overall has handled this very well. I was proud of Starmer yesterday, quite frankly. I've criticised Starmer in numerous areas. I think we're too close to China. I will give credit where credit is due. The day after Trump humiliated Zelensky, Keir Starmer welcomes Zelensky to 10 Downing Street. He comes right out to meet him. He hugs him. Donald Trump's bound to have seen those images, and Starmer must know that Trump will see those images. But he has the tact not to name Trump, and still publicly, say he welcomes Trump's proposals for peace. And I think Starmer is being, on some level, quite clever with this. Although both Starmer and NATO Secretary General Rutte, I have to say, I was disappointed with Mark Rutte because he's putting the focus on Zelensky. Like Zelensky needs to make up. Zelensky needs to go and grovel to Trump rather than You know, I understand as NATO Secretary General, his prerogative is to keep NATO together, but he should be level-handed about it. And putting the blame on Zelensky, I just think that's wrong. So I am disappointed by Mark Rutte. But this summit today in Lancaster House, very significant. You know, many European leaders, plus Justin Trudeau of Canada, and I know Anthony Albanese of Australia sent messages of solidarity as well. Um, it's very significant. I mentioned before that UN vote. 93 countries voted for a resolution that condemned Russia's aggression. I believe the figure was 68 countries or 65 countries abstained. I can't remember the precise figures, it was something like that. And 18 countries voted in favour of Russia. Shamefully, the United States and Israel, it has to be said. Um, Ukraine should be taking a note of this so that in a post war situation, they'll know who they can trust. Um, but I do give Starmer credit. You know, he's shown leadership this week. True, he's still saying, well, look, we'll go ahead with this Trump visit and that's what we're doing. I'm not convinced that we should actually. I certainly don't think we should be rolling out red carpets. He shouldn't be allowed into the Commons. It isn't actually mandatory. You know, that's the prerogative of both the Speaker, parliamentarian. It's not something that's just an automated, you know, you'll definitely get to do that. And actually, not every American president has. Reagan did, Obama did, but not every American president has. So I see no reason why Trump should get privileges in that way. Um, I think there's still a bit too much of, oh, we better not upset Donald. The thing is, you know, the United States, it's maybe a fear of American power. America's the world's biggest economy. It's a major military. Trump threatens his tariffs. But realistically, if the rest of NATO got together, I don't care if it looks like ganging up on America. Maybe the current American administration needs to be ganged up on. They're bullies, and the only language that bullies understand is force. I do wonder, I don't know, I wonder, will Trump back down a little bit? If he realizes that it's not just picking on one country. If most NATO countries get together and just push back a little bit against Trump's nonsense, um, because unfortunately, you know, the Kremlin is lapping this up. Dmitry Medvedev, a war criminal, former Russian president, he had this horrible post in recall, and I quote, he called Zelensky an obstinate pig who's been slapped down by the real Donald Trump. That shows you where we are, where a former Russian president is praising the American president for attacking a European country. It's just, it's a, it's an upside down situation. I saw one meme showing that Zelensky had stood up to Russia's top negotiators, Donald Trump and JD Vance. But the only people I can see in the world who really back Trump on this is deluded MAGA cultists and the Russians. Interestingly enough, even China's abstained. It's not come out vocally for Russia. This is just so. I mean, on one hand, a split in the West is definitely not a good thing, but I do think that the Trump administration is so erratic and untrustworthy that perhaps this will be a wake up call for Europe. I suppose paradoxically, you can argue Trump's almost done that because he's so awful. He's almost forced Europe to have a wake up call in the sense that we do need to get real about security. And I know Georgia Maloney, and she had a private talk with Starmer earlier. She's sort of seen as a bridge because she's close to Trump. She seems to get on with everyone, I've noticed. You know, she must have some diplomatic skills. She gets on well with every British Prime Minister. Her whole time tenure as Italian Prime Minister got on well with other leaders, and you know, I wouldn't dismiss her. It's interesting that whether you want to read it into it or not, the top of the table with Starmer, Zelensky, and Macron. Macron's also played a big role in this, and I just think at this point we also need to know who our true allies are, and I just think this is the time we need to be getting closer to Europe. I'm not talking about me joining the EU necessarily, but I get so fed up with the narrowness of Brexiteers. Oh, The reset is rejoining. Look, there's things going on in the world today. We need to have a reality check. We need to be close to the Commonwealth, for sure. And yes, our European neighbours. We need to work with Trump, but I don't really. One thing I'm not sure about regarding what Starmer's doing is this balancing act of, supporting Zelensky, and he has done that. I give Starmer credit for that, whilst also pandering to Trump. I'm not sure that you can play it both ways. I think we need to distance ourselves from Trump, quite frankly. Um, Even postpone. I mean, look, if we postponed the visit or something like that, Trump would be furious. He'd threaten tariffs. He'd send out insults. But let him, honestly, let him. I just, I think there's a little bit too much fear of America. Actually, it's a powerful country, but if many Americans would not blame us for taking that stance. I think Trump needs to be isolated on some level. I'm not saying start a big fight with Trump. I'm not saying go out of the way to provoke him, but I'm not a fan of this idea that we need to pander to him. We better not provoke him. It's Britain and France and Italy and Germany are not small countries. This idea that we just have to tread carefully, we better not offend America. I'm not really convinced about that. But what we are seeing really is I've just read a piece about what Musk has come out with, that unelected con man. I've never been so disgusted with an American administration as I am now. That's the truth. Even in Trump's first term, I've never felt this strongly. And again, I emphasize I'm not anti-American. I know there's many decent Americans who do not endorse Trump and they support Ukraine. Indeed, there's many Ukrainian Americans. They're American citizens. Um, there's probably a lot more to say about this, but I'll wrap this one up. I just think we are in a very critical point here. Today's meeting in Lancaster House will be very significant. Zelensky also met the King, and yes, it was his suggestion, his request that he visit the King. But the King, you know, no issue about the suit, or I think King Charles III is a good diplomat. Actually, I think he's like his mother. I think he's good with people in that sense. I'm quite proud of my country this week, I have to say, and I'm so grateful I don't live in Trump's America. Um, You could see the body language. Zelensky clearly looked a lot more comfortable here than he did in Washington. I don't blame him. He was hijacked there, ambushed by falsehoods, distortion, gaslighting. But he stood his ground. He stood up to bullies, and that warrants respect. Zelensky isn't perfect, but I think he is an inspiration to many, many people. Some could, I think it could be argued that he's a true leader of the free world. If we want to, not in the sense of power necessarily, but in the sense of inspiration. I mean, it sure as hell isn't Trump, except in the deluded minds of MAGA cultists. I mean, I actually think Trump's making America respected again. Right now, it's a combination of being laughed at and just not despise is probably a strong word, but definitely respect for America's went way, way down in the last month. I mean, Biden, for all his shortcomings, at least was a world leader in a way that Trump just isn't. Biden's age was an issue, but he was a conventional American president. He understood the importance of leadership. Trump doesn't. Trump sees everything as a business deal. Trump believes in groveling to dictators. And I'll say one last thing: this perverse notion that they have of peace. Trump, Vance, and Rubio, they just want peace. What great guys are peaceniks, except that they're not really. What sort of peace is it for the Ukrainian people to have Putin's jackpot on top of them? And I put it to Marco Rubio. If the United States of America, I might be repeating myself, if the United States of America was invaded, millions of Americans were displaced. I think I'm repeating myself. I repeat this. American women were raped. American POWs were tortured. Florida and the Carolinas were under enemy occupation. And some third party came in say Britain or France or Italy, and said, "Oh, you have to give up Florida and the Carolinas," and you started, how the hell would an American patriot react? It's so disgusting that they think they can talk down to the Ukrainians and dictate to them how, it's so abhorrent the way they treat this like some sort of business deal, bring your cards to the table, and it's an insult to the courage of the Ukrainian people. Not once did Trump or Vance acknowledge that. When they talk about Zelensky being disrespectful, not once did Trump and Vance acknowledge the sacrifice and the suffering of the Ukrainian people in terms of sacrificing for the country. I'm just so disgusted with the American administration at this point. And I don't know. I spoke to a young guy from Ukraine today, 19 years old. He's studying here in the UK, and he said the future's dark. We just don't know what's going to happen. He was very well spoken, very good English. I don't know. I've I've mixed feelings. On one hand, I'm disgusted with the American administration. I continue to have admiration for the Ukrainians. I'm quite proud of my country and proud that we are on the right side here in terms of supporting Ukraine. And I feel European. I've never felt this strongly pro-European as I have pre-Brexit. And I'm not a lover of the EU. The EU has many flaws, but European, I'm a European, absolutely. And this week I feel European. I feel like we need to really understand that working closely with our closest neighbours, it just makes sense. And as I always say in these videos, Slava Ukraini.